The midday sun scorched the cracked asphalt of Bellevue, a forgotten town just off the interstate. Trucks rumbled past a dusty garage nestled between a pawn shop and a shuttered diner. A faded sign read, "Manny's Auto, Esther 1973," letters peeling, barely clinging to the wood. Inside, the clang of a wrench echoed off concrete walls. Manny Delgado, 78, hunched over the hood of a beat-up Chevy. His fingers, gnarled and blackened by decades of grease, moved with ritualistic precision. The man was a relic. His joints creaked like the hydraulic lift. His breath wheezed like a dying carburetor. But his eyes? Sharp, determined. Customers had dwindled. The big-name auto centers 2 towns over lured drivers with coupons and lobbies that smelled like cinnamon. Manny had no scented air fresheners, just coffee strong enough to melt paint and a radio tuned to old soul. That Tuesday, a sleek black SUV rolled up, engine sputtering, hood steaming. Out stepped a tall man in a gray cap and sunglasses. No one gave him a second glance, except Manny, who wiped his hands and walked out with a limp. "Looks like she's been screaming for help," Manny said, half to the vehicle, half to the stranger. The man chuckled. Deep, slow, unmistakable. "Can you fix her? Depends. You willing to pay in cash or stories?" The man smiled wider. "Stories are free. Repairs? I got the green." Neither knew yet that this encounter, simple, transactional, would unearth decades of injustice, spark a small-town reckoning, and ripple far beyond Bellevue. A week from now, news vans would swarm this garage, but today it was just an old mechanic, a stranger, and a broken car on the cusp of a storm. 2 days after the SUV rolled in, Manny made a phone call. "Alternator's done. Pulley was grinding. She's ready." The voice on the other end thanked him, promised to swing by that afternoon. But when the SUV pulled into the lot again, Manny wasn't alone. Troy Callahan, the regional manager for DriveX Auto, had arrived unannounced. DriveX had been buying up independent shops all across the state, offering pennies, enforcing buyouts, and then leveling garages like Manny's to put up neon-lit franchises. He wore a fitted polo and smugness like cologne. Manny was under the car when Troy stormed in. "You ignoring the offer, Delgado? We sent the papers. You don't respond, we escalate." Manny slid out from beneath the vehicle, wiping his hands. "You want to talk business? Make an appointment?" Troy scoffed. "You call this business? This is a museum. You still issue receipts on carbon paper? You don't even have a website. Nobody under 40 knows this place exists." The garage was quiet, but outside, a small crowd had gathered. Locals who brought in their beaters, a couple of teens from the high school. Even the mailman paused his route. Word traveled fast in Bellevue. And humiliation had gravity. Troy turned to them. "Let me spell it out. Manny here's refusing to sell, and in 6 weeks, the city's zoning changes kick in. That means condemnation. He'll lose this dump for free." A few gasps. One woman looked away. Manny said nothing, just stood, breathing hard, eyes locked on Troy, decades of sweat and pride trembling on the edge of collapse. Then, from the side, the tall man from before stepped into view, still in gray, still quiet. Samuel L. Jackson removed his sunglasses. His stare hit like thunder, and the air changed, but no one spoke, not yet. The sun had dipped just low enough to cast long shadows across the cracked garage lot. Dust danced in the light, but all eyes were fixed on the man now standing between Manny and Troy, his silhouette sharp, still, like a storm cloud waiting to break. Samuel L. Jackson didn't speak right away. He just looked. He looked at Manny, stoic, hurt. A man trying not to shake in front of his community. He looked at Troy, young, brash, drunk on authority, his words still echoing like static in the hot air. And then he looked at the crowd. That's when people started to whisper. That unmistakable face, that voice they'd heard deliver righteous fury in courtroom dramas and gangland ultimatums. Was it really him? He crouched near the front of Manny's garage, picked up a lug nut, rolled it between his fingers like it held a secret. "You know," Samuel said finally, his voice low and gravel-rich, "the thing about men who throw around threats, they usually haven't built a damn thing in their life." Troy blinked, caught off guard. "Excuse me?" Samuel stood, slowly, like a man measuring his words in megatons. "I wasn't talking to you, yet." Tension tightened the scene. A mechanic from across the street stopped working. A teenage boy pulled out his phone to record. Manny didn't move, didn't need to. Samuel turned to him. "Manny, you built this place?" 48 years ago, and you fixed my car like it was born yesterday." Manny nodded, swallowing something bitter behind his teeth. Samuel turned back to Troy. "This man's worth more than your whole damn chain of franchises. But I'm guessing you already know that. You're just hoping no one else sees it." The silence that followed was absolute, but the reckoning had begun. Samuel stepped forward, only slightly, but enough to make Troy instinctively lean back. The distance between them now carried weight, not the kind measured in inches, but in intent. "I asked you a question," Samuel said, voice low but sharp as cut glass. "You know exactly who this man is, don't you?" Troy tried to regain composure. "Mr. Jackson, this is a business negotiation. We've made an offer. Fair and legal." Samuel's eyes narrowed. "Legal ain't the same as just. You're banking on a man's pride keeping him silent. You think embarrassment's a weapon. Let me ask you, how many shops have you buried?" "Like this?" Troy scoffed. "It's called progress. You can't cling to the past forever." "This shop is outdated." "This shop," Samuel interrupted, his tone rising just enough to cut through the air, "fed families, trained kids who had nowhere else to go, fixed cars at 2 a.m. for nurses who had to get to shifts." "You call that outdated?" Troy looked around, suddenly aware of the silent crowd, their eyes now firmly on Samuel. The balance of power was shifting, fast. Samuel turned to the crowd. "How many of you had a moment where this place saved your ass? Flat tire? Dead battery? Manny pulling a sandwich from his lunch to feed someone's kid while they waited?" Hands started to rise. A single voice spoke from the back, an older woman. "He fixed my brakes for free when my husband passed." Another man added, "He taught my nephew how to use a wrench when the boy was headed for juvie." Samuel faced Troy again. "You see, man, you're not up against one old mechanic. You're standing on a fault line of decency you didn't know existed. And it's cracking." Troy's face flushed. "This is harassment." "No," Samuel said, stepping even closer. "This is exposure. You're the roach that ran into the light." Troy tried to speak, but nothing came. Samuel's voice dropped to a whisper, but everyone heard it. "Walk away now, or we open every file, every forced closure, every contract you've bullied down the throats of folks too tired to fight." Troy stared. Then he did what cowards do when faced with unflinching truth. He turned and walked. The crowd didn't cheer. They just stood in reverent silence, watching the man they thought they knew, Manny, stand a little taller. After Troy's hasty retreat, the air in Bellevue seemed to breathe again. But Samuel didn't leave. He walked back inside Manny's garage, where the smell of old oil and perseverance clung to the air like incense in a chapel. Manny sat on a stool, shoulders slumped, not from defeat, but from the weight of years finally being seen. Samuel leaned on the workbench. "This isn't just about one garage, is it?" Manny shook his head. "No, sir. They've shut down 7 shops in the last year. Harold's over in Eastgate. They pushed him out. He's living in his RV now. Jimmy in Ridgeland had to sell. His tools just to pay rent. These DriveX boys got backing, lawyers, loopholes, and councilmen in their pockets." Samuel's jaw clenched. "And no one fights back?" "They tried. But one by one they got squeezed. Permits lost. Tax audits popping up. Some of these fellas had heart attacks. From the stress, I held out, but..." He looked at the wall, at the old Polaroids of customers through the decades. "I knew my time was coming." Samuel nodded slowly. "No, it's not." That night he made some calls. Not to agents or producers, but to investigators, lawyers, and 2 journalists he trusted. He pulled strings not with fame, but with righteousness. Within 48 hours, a quiet probe began unraveling DriveX's pattern, pressuring elderly business owners, falsifying permit violations, even colluding with city officials. What began as a one-man shakedown had suddenly become a potential scandal. And Manny's garage, it was ground zero for a reckoning. By the week's end, reporters were calling. Legal aid groups showed up offering free representation. Manny sat stunned while his dusty desk became command central for a small-town uprising. He looked at Samuel once and said, "Why me?" Samuel simply replied, "Because they thought you were the last. Turns out you're the first." By Monday morning, DriveX Auto's name was on every local news channel. A leaked report, complete with testimony from former employees, outlined a chilling playbook. Identify aging owners, weaponize zoning ordinances, file nuisance complaints, force undervalued buyouts, and demolish. The blueprint was systematic, predatory, and the story had gone national. Manny's garage, once a whisper of the past, was now a symbol. Journalists turned the cracked driveway into a pulpit. Former shop owners began arriving, uninvited, but welcomed like kin. They brought faded invoices, old uniforms, and trembling stories. Each one echoed the same chorus. They tried to erase us. Troy Callahan tried to disappear. But Samuel wasn't done. A town hall meeting was called. Packed to capacity, cameras lined the back wall. A podium waited under flickering lights. The mayor opened with hollow words, talking about future development and economic shifts. Then Samuel L. Jackson walked up to the mic. No fancy speech, he began. Just facts. He held up a copy of the leaked DriveX strategy. Then he read the section about Bellevue, how Manny's property was listed under target, vulnerable, asset-rich, low resistance. The crowd gasped. Samuel looked directly at the mayor. "You saw this. You signed off. You sat at the table and ate while your people starved." The mayor tried to interject. "Mr. Jackson, you're not—" Samuel leaned forward. "I am a citizen. I am a witness, and I am tired of watching men like you profit off the silence of the decent." Applause exploded like thunder. Within a week, 3 city officials resigned. DriveX's CEO stepped down. A criminal investigation was launched. Bellevue's council voted unanimously to freeze all property seizures. And Manny, he kept his garage. But now it was more than that. It was a monument, a fortress that outlived the wolves. Samuel didn't disappear after the fire died down. He stayed quietly, intentionally. One morning, he arrived at Manny's garage with a briefcase. No entourage, no cameras, just him. Inside was a deed, official, notarized. It transferred full ownership of the land, including the adjacent 2 lots previously marked for redevelopment, to Manny Delgado. No liens, no catches. Free and clear. Manny opened the envelope slowly, hands trembling. "What is this?" "A foundation," Samuel replied, "in your name. For the next generation of mechanics who'll learn not just how to fix engines, but how to stand when the world tries to push them down." Along with the deed came seed money. Samuel had quietly partnered with a union of veteran tradesmen, an education nonprofit, and a few actors who, as he said, had more money than sense. Together they formed the Delgado Apprenticeship Initiative to train at-risk youth in automotive skills, ethics, and community repair. A week later, the garage reopened under a new sign, Delgado's Legacy, School of Mechanics and Justice. The ribbon cutting wasn't flashy. Manny didn't want a spectacle, but people came, lots of them, former clients, former enemies, students, teachers, journalists. Even the mayor showed up, sheepish, handing Manny a letter of apology endorsed by the city council. Samuel stood, off to the side, sunglasses on, watching as a line of teenagers signed up for classes. One of them, a lanky 16-year-old with oil-stained jeans, asked, "You really the Samuel L. Jackson?" He nodded. "Yeah." "Why you help in a place like this?" Samuel cracked a smile. Because respect doesn't come from a job title or a bank account. It comes from showing up when it matters. And he did, in a world that often forgot. The builders, Samuel, made sure the foundation stood firm. 6 months later, the garage buzzed with a new kind of life. Gone were the lonely silences and aging routines. In their place, laughter, clanking tools, and the low hum of music spilling from a Bluetooth speaker hooked to a rusted shelf. Manny, now mentor and legend, had a clipboard in hand and a workshop apron embroidered with the words Mr. D stitched by one of the students as a tribute. He still worked the occasional engine, but his real job had shifted, teaching, guiding, making sure the next generation didn't just learn torque specs and compression ratios, but dignity, self-respect, and how to look someone in the eye when shaking their hand. His mornings started, early coffee in hand, walking the bays and checking in on students. His afternoons were spent reviewing grant proposals and meeting with educators. Once a week, he visited the neighboring lots, now transformed into classrooms, a welding zone, and a communal garden built by the kids themselves. Bellevue had changed too. Other small business owners, emboldened by Manny's stand, began speaking out. Old diners reopened. A barbershop once threatened with demolition was granted historical status. The town started to remember what it meant to stand together. Manny wasn't just a mechanic anymore. He was a symbol, a living legacy. One morning, a letter arrived, handwritten. From a young man now enrolled in a technical college, full scholarship. His words, "You fixed more than my car. You fixed my life, Manny." Read it twice. Then, without saying a word, placed it beside the cash register, where a jar used to sit labeled tips and prayers. Now it simply read stories, and every person who came through the garage had one. It was a crisp fall evening when Samuel L. Jackson finally spoke publicly about what had happened in Bellevue. He was invited to speak at a national symposium on community rebuilding, held in a modest auditorium in Chicago. He didn't send a press release. He didn't post a teaser. He just walked on stage, adjusted the mic, and began. "I'm not here because I'm an actor. I'm here because I saw a man almost erased." A hush fell over the audience. You see, we live in a world that pretends progress means replacement, that the old must fall to make room for the new. But progress without memory? Without respect? That's not growth. That's gentrification dressed in a gold tie. He paused. Let the silence sit. I met Manny Delgado when my car broke down. What I found was not a broken engine, but a broken system. One that preys on the elderly, silences craftsmen, and shovels dirt over the graves of dignity. He held up a photograph. Manny, surrounded by students, grease on his hands, pride in his posture. This man taught me something. And I've played a lot of roles, but I've never met a character more real than him. The audience rose in applause, and then came the line, the one that would circle the internet, print on T-shirts, and find its way onto a plaque outside. Delgado's Garage. Respect doesn't cost a damn thing, but withholding it costs everything. That night the speech went viral. Manny's story became a case study. Law schools debated it, city councils replayed it, and the country for a brief moment remembered the name of an old mechanic in a town once forgotten. Because Samuel didn't just fix a car, he fixed the silence. A year later, Bellevue didn't look the same. The potholes were patched. The old diner reopened, now run by a single mom who once trained under Manny. A mural stretched across the side of Delgado's Garage, Samuel L. Jackson and Manny side by side, under bold letters, "Built, not bought." The Garage's apprentice program had grown into a full-fledged trade school, attracting students from neighboring counties. Every graduate left not just with skills, but with a vow to return, repair, and remember. National programs began mimicking the model. Foundations sprung up named after forgotten mechanics, welders, and shopkeepers, men and women who had once been easy to ignore, until Manny's story taught the world otherwise. And as for Samuel, he never made it about him. When asked in interviews, he'd deflect. "This ain't my movie, I'm just the narrator." But on the anniversary of that first repair, he returned to Bellevue. No cameras, no speeches, just him and Manny, side by side on a bench out back, drinking coffee from mismatched mugs. They sat in silence, watching a new batch of kids tinker with engines, arguing over spark plugs and timing belts like philosophers of machinery. Manny leaned back and whispered, "Didn't think I'd still be here." Samuel grinned. "Didn't think I'd be learning from you either." The two men chuckled. Then came the final frame, quiet, dignified, enduring. A wide shot of the garage under twilight. The sign above the bay doors illuminated in soft gold light. Delgado's Legacy, where hands build futures, and just beneath it, etched in steel. Respect doesn't cost a damn thing, but withholding it costs everything. Fade out.